There's just a verse that's been resonating for a lot of us at Bread for the World this year. For I know the plans I have for you, declares the Lord, plans to prosper you and not to harm you, plans to give you hope and a future. Well, many of you know me already. I'm David Gist with Bread for the World. I've been with Bread for 21 plus years. Most of that time as the California organizer, occasionally Arizona and Hawaii. And then starting Thanksgiving last year, I'm the organizer for 11 Western states, and I'm still in shock. So that's a big change. But anyway, we don't have to talk about that. I just want to note that here's the outline for our time. We'll definitely get to some question and answer at the end, but I have a couple of questions that came up front that I'll try to integrate into our time. But I want you to, even though you probably already know Bread for the World, let me just reintroduce Bread to say that we are a Christian movement seeking an end to hunger. And I'm going to go back, and we do that through education and advocacy. You know, we educate ourselves, we educate our leaders, we educate one another together to understand hunger and its root causes, but we also speak out to our elected leaders. And I think in your hunger network, you are very experienced at doing that and very good at doing that. But sometimes it also calls for us to have that vision of what would the world look like. So I'm going to go ahead and ask this next question, and that is, why involve the government? Why do we need to advocate? Why can't we just eliminate hunger through our charities, our churches, our good works that we do? Let's not take too long on this because we have some other ground to cover, but does anyone want to unmute and offer an answer?
Because churches and charities can't do it on their own.
I agree, Liz. Yeah. Oh, sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off.
That's all I had to say. We just can't do it on our own. I remember Bread had a very good graphic that showed the contribution that churches and charities make,
right,
eliminating problem of hunger and how that compares to government spending.
I was going to say the amount of money that the government has, it can make such a big difference. So, and we're part of that decision process of how that budget gets determined. So.
Right. Very good. Those are both great answers. There are a lot of Bread's come up with graphics over the years to describe this. And sometimes we have that graphic where we talk about, how much of our donations of food are really private from our churches and charities, and how much of it is public through programs like the WIC and SNAP and things like that. And here is that graphic, and as you can see, it's pretty one-sided, and that's not a criticism of our churches and charities. It's just a reminder when we go out and talk about this. When you talk about what you do with ELCA, with the network, when you talk about what you do when you partner with Bread, it's just important for people to understand that when something like SNAP or any important federal nutrition program is cut, it will cause hunger, because the federal nutrition programs are absolutely covering 90%. It was 95% at one point, but covering 90% of food assistance. So that's a lot. The size and scale is a big one. Other times people remind us that another reason we need to advocate, we need to involve the government, is because sometimes it's an unjust law or an unjust policy that's actually causing hunger, causing hardship, causing a bad situation overseas or here in this country. So we need to create a better law, a just law, or simply undo that law. And some of you may be familiar with the graphic on the left. I think it reminds me what happens when society kind of just responds with equal response for everyone. Well, everyone gets a bicycle, or let's solve this by everyone gets this same thing, equal inputs, rather than thinking about equitable outcomes. And so under the second part of the lower part of the graphic, someone who's differently abled would use a differently abled bicycle. The tall gentleman would need a taller bicycle. The girl, she fits in hers pretty well, and then the graphics cut off, but the boy who was too small, he needed a smaller bicycle. So thinking about equal and equitable outcomes rather than inputs is another way of carrying out justice. And then lastly, why do we advocate? Well, the Bible calls us to, and I think we've talked about this before. The late Lutheran Reverend George Johnson was so helpful in guiding us on thinking about that. He's the one that reminds us that when God called to Moses from the burning bush, it wasn't to take up a collection of material goods, of food, of blankets, of cream for ointment for skin cream and things like that, that the things that we do at our churches that we need to do, they're precious and valuable. I'm not dismissing those, but in that case, God called Moses and Aaron and sent them to Pharaoh to set my people free, let my people go. And it was an act of political advocacy. So when we explain this in our churches, when we explain this in our small groups, I think we should always remind people that this is not some secular activity. This is right out of the Bible, early in the formation of the story of the people of Israel. It was foundational to their lives and their journey. So political advocacy on God's direction to do that on behalf of poor, suffering people of Israel. So we also can say, don't tell us that we can't do this as a church. Don't tell us I'm not called to be political as a Christian. I am called to speak out to our elected leaders in these ways. And the Bible goes on. And of course, there are many other traditions in the Bible about that. But I just wanted to cite that first one, because I think you're familiar with that kind of territory. You've probably heard these things from George Johnson, from Edie, from Mary Claire, from me, from so many other people who do these things, and you've probably shared those examples yourselves in your churches. But it's helpful to keep that in mind, I think. Let me go to the next thing and just talk for a moment about Bread for the World advocacy. And I have a link there that at the end of the PowerPoint, I'm going to drop a few links in the chat. So that's a link if someone just wants to have a resource of a 1 minute and I think 20 seconds of video showing what the letter writing might look like. But Anton actually asked before we began, do letters make a difference? Because he was getting that question. And that reminds me of an example that illustrates what difference letters do make. And some of you who've been with Bread a long time have seen a video telling this story. And it's about a woman named Connie Wick in Indiana, who used to write faithfully to her senator on behalf of Bread for the World. And she would write to him and she kept writing. And so he, he's a senator from Indiana. He's getting lots of letters, but he knew who she was. He read those letters, he got it, and he knew who she was. And one day, and again, we have this on film, there's a conference where at that time, President George W. Bush and Senator Richard Lugar from Indiana and David Beckman, the president of Bread for the World at that time, were all at this conference. And I think, what was the order? I think Senator Lugar and David Beckman are talking, and they realized, we need to talk to the president about this. So they went over and they started talking to President Bush about it. And Senator Lugar quoted and cited Connie Wick and her letters. And he talked about the impact they had on him. So Connie Wick's letters not only reached her senator, they were quoted and cited to the president of the United States around hunger. And that at that conference, the three of them talked about what they were going to do next in terms of global hunger. So our letters do make a difference. Our letters really do make a difference. And it could be just one letter, it could be 10 letters, it could be 100 letters, but our letters matter. Our emails matter, our phone calls matter, it all matters. But the better we do it, the more strategic we are, I think the more it pays off. And so this year, one of the things that Bread has been encouraging people to do around the country is, for instance, when we have our letter writing at a church, and then we gather those letters, and maybe they're to the senators this year because the Farm Bill is running primarily through the Senate, then maybe they'll gather those letters, they'll call a local office in advance and say, I'd like to deliver some letters. What do you do with those letters? And then you find out from the office, we're going to scan your letters and we'll scan and email the scans of the letters to the DC office. Or, we'll put your letters in a packet and mail it to the DC office. And that way your letters can reach policymakers in Washington, D.C. faster than mailing them directly to Washington, D.C., where they get rerouted through Kansas City for radiation treatment and anthrax scares and all those kinds of things. So find out what your local person will do. And your local office will do. We also have been encouraging people to, and I can help with this, to send a short email note to the legislative director for your senator. And I've got those names and contacts. I can send that out. And let them know we just had some letter writing at my church. Here's what we're writing about, and we're delivering them to your office. So just so you know, this is coming. You know, I've got 23 letters, I've got 72 letters, whatever it is. And sometimes churches are even teaming up and delivering those letters together. So we say, well, we got 12 at our church, you got 26, we got some other church got 20, another 20. So together we're even more impressive. We got 3 churches together piling those letters. So yes, our letters can be effective. I think you already know Bread for the World, so I probably don't need to explain how, you know, we're bipartisan. We have Republicans and Democrats on our board of directors. We keep all that. We try very hard not to get involved in partisan politics. But I do want to give an example of how not just letters, but your connection and support of Bread has been useful. Last year, some of you may remember we were working on something called the Global Food Security Act, or reauthorizing the Global Food Security Act. It was going great. It had bipartisan support. It was moving forward. And this is a bill that every time it comes up, the cynics in Washington tell us it's not going to work. It's not worth your time. And then we passed it the first time. We got it reauthorized. We got it reauthorized again. Well, this time it was going great until, unfortunately, the Republican senator on the key committee and the Democratic senator on the key committee, the chair and the ranking member, got into a personal tiff. And so they had a little tiff, and they weren't speaking to one another. They weren't getting along. And this and other bills were not going to go forward because they couldn't work together anymore. So we thought, oh, come on, we can't lose this campaign over that kind of pettiness. So we contacted some other senators on the committee, and they were feeling likewise. They're thinking, no, this is a good bill. We got to get this through. So we talked to folks with those other Senate offices, and those senators intervened and got the 2 feuding senators to agree to move the Global Food Security Act reauthorizing bill to another bill, to tack it onto another bill, which was not a random bill. It was a bill that was thematically connected, and it was a bill that was mandated to pass. So it would absolutely go through. And so they got it passed that way. So sometimes we just have to intervene a little bit and help Washington get out of its own way. So I just share that to encourage you that we don't give up easily. And I know you don't give up easily. So I hope you can explain these kinds of things to your pastors, to your leaders, to folks who are wondering, you know, why do you do this? Why do you get involved in advocating? I bet a number of you remember the One campaign. Remember the One campaign? I know ELCA was very involved. Bread for the World was very involved. The One campaign, and we used to hear about the Millennium Development Goals all the time. They eventually got renamed to Millennium Sustainable Goals. That's okay. But there's another link I'll share that talks a little bit more about cutting hunger in half around the world by 2030. That was a big goal, and we're getting closer, and it's hard to reach because of so many things happening now, like the war in Ukraine that has affected food supplies and grain, and I guess I didn't even realize Ukraine was such a food basket for the world, but until this war. And also climate change. We've been hearing and learning from farmers in parts of the world who are desperately trying to farm successfully despite climate change. For instance, there was a conference in Nairobi, Kenya late last year where we learned a lot about that from Kenyan farmers. So I think we can agree there's a food crisis overseas, but there's also interesting crisis here in the United States. Let's see if I can get that to change. There we go. I would say we even have a food crisis here in the US. So let me give a little background before I get into this image and some of the things that you're seeing on the screen. Last September, the White House held a conference, the White House conference on hunger, diet, health. I may have the name wrong, but hunger and health were the primary parts. It was really mostly about hunger. And the president and the nation have committed to goals around food security and nutrition. And there again, there's a link I can put in the chat room at the end of this PowerPoint. I'm just not able to do it while I'm running the PowerPoint. But the nation has committed to ending hunger and to increase our healthy eating by 2030. So they want to end hunger in the US by 2030 and drastically change how we eat by 2030. Well, that's all well and good, but the reality is our agricultural and food policy are absolutely preventing us from doing that. It's not that we couldn't change it, but what we're doing now and what we've been doing until now is absolutely going to prevent those goals from being reached. And I would say we've even reached a point that I could say is an existential crisis. I thought about getting an image on the slide of Edvard Munch's painting of the Scream, kind of that existential crisis. But we really do have that. Think about that. We've got rising hunger and malnutrition. We have advancing climate change. We've got a food and farm system that is poisoning the earth and it's limiting our capacity to feed hungry people. So let me spell that out in more detail. So we all agree, I hope we mostly agree that climate change is a real thing. And we have rising carbon dioxide levels. Well, that's making our food less nutritious. Now, we may read about this and hear about this online or in different programs, but not very frequently. But it's serious. It's robbing key crops of vitamins that are essential to human development. Additionally, the current farming system is depleting the soil by overusing chemicals and emphasizing monocrop farming rather than multi-crop farming, which takes less of a toll on the land. Now, why would I mention crop insurance? Well, we're going to be talking about the Farm Bill, and crop insurance is title number 11 of the Farm Bill. It's part of it. Anyway, consequently, cropland soil is eroding 10 times faster than it is replenished, 10 times. And US crops are diminishing in nutritional value, especially in zinc and iron. Those are the two big losses. So I would argue that nutritious food depends on healthy soil. And this rapid soil degradation raises the prospect that the world won't be able to produce enough food. And I don't think we've thought that for a little while. There's always been a problem of food distribution, of food equality, but not necessarily that we wouldn't be able to produce enough nutritious food for people to eat, but we're moving in that direction. So I would say agricultural policy currently and our current environmental degradation have become hunger issues. And that's one of the ways I want to see that intersection, that we're not just talking about climate change because it is a crisis, but we're talking about it also in this context because it's creating a hunger and food crisis. So as you see, I'm hinting on the screen, depleted soil leads to fewer nutrients in the food, which is less nutritious food. And I would suggest that having less nutritious food puts food insecure people at a greater risk of hunger. Definitely concerned about people whose bodies are weaker and who have less nutrition, that then their nutrition would even get worse in the coming years because our nutritional quality of products is going down, crops. Another thing is that farm commodities and percentages show that we have priorities for animal feed, for the global livestock industry, and for junk food, high fructose corn syrup products, not healthy food. So it's a question of what are we actually growing? We're growing things for global livestock, animal feed. We're growing things that get put into junk food. We're not necessarily growing as much healthy food. So we're making junk food cheaper, and that's where most of the farm subsidies go, the farm commodity payments, not to healthier broccoli, for example. And too often the food of choice for low-income households is junkier food. So we have a public health issue like diabetes. Now, this is nothing new. I mean, I think a lot of us know this already, but as the problem gets worse and worse, we're seeing an opportunity to just pivot and change this policy through changing the Farm Bill. Another area that Bread for the World has been learning a lot is meeting. We've been meeting with Native American groups, farming groups. We've been meeting with Black farmer groups, with Latinx farmer groups, with different immigrant community farm groups, and learning how they have been pushed out of the system, how they've been pushed out of farm systems, and what would be helpful for them to have a fair shot and level the playing field for them to be successful farmers again. So as we learn from them, we've gotten interested in how we can speak out that way. What can we do this year with the Farm Bill? So that was a mouthful, sorry, but here's the question. And it does sound, well, here's the question. How do we create a food system, like an actual food system that would allow hungry people to access nutritious food? We'd love for more hungry people to be able to go to farmers markets, right? That would be fantastic. And that's much more easy in California and some states than it is in others. So whereas we might think, well, that's not a problem. I know that happens here. Right, that's not a problem as much in California, but nationwide, we don't have everyone on the same page. You know, how can we incentivize farming that's gentler on the land? And I want to be clear, I don't think Bread for the World sees farmers as the problem. We see the system as the problem, because farmers are going to go where incentives are. I mean, farmers are going to try to be fruitful farmers, are going to grow what crops they know, grow what crops that are going to be successful. But if we incentivize things that are less healthy or more damaging to the land, well, then we've made choices. Number three, we also have some opportunities around food waste. We can absolutely recover more food waste and create less food waste. And some of you are already aware that up to 40% of food is wasted in the US, and that we have a lot of food waste in landfills, and that is creating methane, and methane is contributing to climate change. So that's very serious, and yet it's something we have a chance to work on. And Bread's hopeful that that's actually some of the lower hanging fruit this year, that we actually might find some bipartisan support around food waste and reforming that. Number four, you see racial inequity. I've already talked a little bit about that. And number five, reducing diabetes, just improving the diet. 6, I haven't gotten to yet. So let me note that some of you who have worked with Bread remember when we worked on reforming food aid. Instead of trying to ship food aid overseas and paying 50% of the shipping of the food aid budget to shippers, because these shippers were smart enough to run US flags on them, though they were not necessarily all US owned, and they were not necessarily employing only US people, but they're hoodwinking the government into thinking it's some US jobs boon, and it's not. And so we ship our food to a place of famine and crisis. Well, can anyone guess what happens when we do that? Well, the food's a lot slower getting there. We spend 50% of the money on shipping instead of on people who are starving. And we end up dumping a bunch of food in a region, which just doesn't do any favors for the local farmers. And sometimes the food is culturally inappropriate. It's not food they would want. So it makes a lot more sense to buy in a region of food crisis or famine and distribute it there as close as you can to that region. That's what almost every other development government in the world does, except, of course, the US, because we have the shipping lobby and we have John Garamendi and we have other people who think like that. So that sounds like a lot of work, right? That sounds like 25 years of work. We'll need to reform this for the rest of our lives. But I would say no, it's not, because it's all in that one bill. It's all part of the Farm Bill. You may remember from previous years, the Farm Bill is reauthorized every 5 years. That's how much money the last bill cost. It was a very big bill. It's a lot of money. But through all these different ways, we talk about diet and public health and food and all these things, it's really touching the lives of almost everyone in the US. And I would add to that it's so important. I think this is the most important campaign reforming the Farm Bill that Bread for the World has been involved in 15 years. Now, when you see this pie chart, there's a lot of green there. The SNAP program, Supplemental Nutrition Assistance Program, SNAP, or food stamps, or as we say in California, CalFresh, that's 76%. That's a lot. But remember that graphic at the beginning with the grocery bags. It's necessary. And do people remember what happened with the recession of 2007 and 8? Food prices around the world were spiking. People went hungry. I remember there was rioting and unrest a lot of parts of the world. And here in the US, during that recession, unemployment rose, poverty figures rose, but hunger did not significantly rise, if at all. And why? Right there on the screen. SNAP, also WIC, school meals, federal nutrition programs made the difference. That is why we don't have so many people going hungry. So with this year, if people in Congress decide they're going to chop a bunch of, make a huge budget cut to SNAP, people will go hungry. And it's a very, very valuable and profitable program. So we do need SNAP. So I don't, even though a lot of our farm policy and the farm bill is problematic, SNAP is essential. We want to make it better, but we don't want to just drop it. So with all this I've been saying, I tried to, put this in a nutshell. I think at Bread for the World, we're seeking to reform and pass the farm bill in these 4 ways. We really want SNAP to be more accessible and nutritious. We absolutely want the food system that we create and ag policy and farm policy and food policy, not only to protect the earth, but actually to restore the earth. There are opportunities for regenerative farming and all kinds of processes and practices that would help restore the earth rather than just kind of maintaining or slowing down how much damage we're doing. And number 3, to include rather than exclude people of color, and I'll get into some specifics. And then, of course, as I said before, to equip the U.S. better, to respond better to famines and food crises overseas. And that link is to Bread's Farm Bill policy platform, which is big. That's why I tried to pare it down on this slide. To get into more specifics, though, what can we do this year around SNAP? Because it's so important. Well, number 1, let's make sure it gets funded. We just want to make sure it doesn't get cut. So we're going to have to do some defensive work and protect it from budget cuts. But you also want to make sure it's funded generously. So that number 1 is really important. The second one, I don't know if people are familiar with GusNIP. There is a federal nutrition program named for a late congressman named Gus Schumacher. And it's a Gus Schumacher Nutrition Incentive Program. But that's a mouthful, so people say GusNIP. GusNIP, it's a great acronym. And GusNIP would allow more SNAP beneficiaries to go to the farmer's market and get fresh fruits and vegetables. That's a win-win. We absolutely want that. And we think that there's bipartisan support for that. So we're hopeful for that reform. Number 3, we want to eliminate some barriers to SNAP. And these barriers are pretty suspect to me. I think there's a racial element to these barriers. So we know that formerly incarcerated people or incarcerated people are overly represented by people of color. So eliminating barriers to SNAP for formerly incarcerated people would be a huge boost to all people leaving prison, but especially if you have a larger group represented by people of color. We see that as a racial equity issue. I don't know if you're familiar, but in some states, it's actually former felons are banned from SNAP for life. Life. I mean, what happened to paying your debt to society? I mean, people have left prison, they're reintegrating into society, and they're banned for life. Thank you, Florida. So there's some states that function like that. California does not, but there are too many states that think like that. So we want to get rid of that. There are also a lot of low-income college students, sometimes college students at junior colleges, community colleges, but lower-income college students are more often students of color, people of color, than different ratios among college population overall. And there are work requirements so that you qualify for SNAP. We recognize that you have a very low income, you need the support, but we want you to work for it too. But don't we want them to go to school? Don't we want college students taking classes and focusing on school, not working to jump through a hoop for some federal requirement? So that's nonsensical to me. And I hope you agree with that. So that's why we have that in there. We want to eliminate those barriers. Now, in some states, in some regions, Native American communities do have SNAP administered on reservations, which is great. It's more accessible. There's a greater respect for sovereignty to have Native people do that on their own reservation. But in some regions, that is not possible. So we want to break through that. I think there'd be greater respect for Indigenous people, for First Peoples, and not having people go to 3 different offices in a neighboring city to try to administer SNAP. The 5th one is something where California is really a leader. California passed a bill in went into effect in January 1st of 2022, working on food waste, and that's just a first step. But I think around the country, if we can get more states working on reducing food waste, not putting so much in landfill, and trying to improve food recovery, that could be very, very helpful. And there again, we think that there may be some bipartisan support. I kind of explained number 6 already. I mean, it's just a matter of incentivizing the right things. So I think we can incentivize more sustainable farming, incentivize restorative farming and restorative techniques, growing food for people rather than animals as a greater priority. So I think too often, at risk of using a catchphrase, big ag, sorry, but certain big ag or giant agricultural not corporations, but companies are benefiting from farm policy rather than smaller farmers, smaller families, people who really could use the support, and people who are doing green things. And then I've already explained the last one. We just want to support funding for international food programs like Food for Peace, and to prioritize buying food locally near the crisis point rather than buying stuff overseas. So these are our talking points. Let me just pause because I've just talked way too long, and I want to get into how we can organize some letter writing, but I want to pause here and just see if anyone has questions about what we've covered so far at content. You might have a disagreement or a different perspective, or you might just have a question. Does anyone have a question about any of these policy points? If you do, just unmute, or if you put your hand up, I won't see it because I can't see many people. Okay, well, I'll take it. We don't have any questions just yet, but if you do, let me know. I know someone wrote something in the chat, but I'm not able to see that as long as I'm sharing my screen. Well, I would love it if we could plan offerings of letters at your respective churches. I wonder if anyone here is, you're all in Northern California, right? Because of the Synod. So there's nobody here from Orange County, is there? I wouldn't have thought, but if there is, just someone, send me a note or unmute and we can talk about that. It's of course very helpful to have your pastor on board. Maybe some of you are the pastor, and that's great. But if you have your pastor on board, you have someone speaking about this or preaching about these kinds of themes that day, that's very helpful. Let's see, and there are resources out there. I mean, Paul Tice is a one-man force out there. I don't know, Paul, if you're on here somewhere, but speaking about these things, he's setting up offerings of letters. He's been setting up offerings of letters. He's planning a Zoom meeting with his congressman, so he's getting a lot of good things done, and I think we can do that. I think planning and timing things in your church calendar is crucial. So I'm encouraging most offerings of letters to be timed for just after Easter, meaning April 16, April 23, April 30, May 7. I wouldn't necessarily suggest May 14 because that's Mother's Day, but those 4 I think are pretty well timed. And if you need to go later, if you want to go sooner, like in the next few weeks, that's great. But those are well timed. One thing the timing will do is that will help us when Bread for the World and some of you around the country are in Washington, D.C. in June, and you've opened up doors by sending those letters, and we're able to get more meetings. So talking with the right pastor, getting good timing. I think just being creative and open to different ways of having letter writing. Some churches, more often in the past, churches would actually incorporate letter writing into the worship service in place of a sermon or writing time.
I've heard of it, I'm not sure I've ever seen it.
So that's one way to do it. I would just see maybe if it's too much to organize an offering of letters at the whole church at once, or if you don't think you'll have enough success with that, think about breaking it into smaller groups. Can community groups all do this? Maybe you have 3 or 4 different community groups, or women's group, men's group, the choir, anyone who could get together and do some letter writing. And we have sample letters, we have sample outlines, and I'm going to show you those. and we have talking points. So we want to make it as simple as possible, even though this is a big, complicated bill. We also have a terrific website, and I'm gonna pretty soon I'm gonna stop sharing screen and take us to the website and just show you that, or stop sharing the PowerPoint and take you to the website. Let me just show you, well, that's our bottom line again. Those are kind of the big four things that I hope every letter could include if they can. But I'm gonna go one past this actually. I'm working with a church in Sacramento, and we were talking about how they've got a lot of experience in it, and they don't necessarily want to have a sample letter this year. They'd prefer to have a sample outline. And so I think the basics of an outline is right here. You're introducing yourself by name and church, and give a reason why you're writing. We always want to personalize those letters up front. So tell them maybe your faith is calling you this. Maybe you volunteer at a food bank, or your church provides meals and you're seeing more and more people. You're seeing different people. And when you say that early on in your letter takes on special categorical meaning for the office in Congress. Because at that point, they're talking about something in the district, boom, 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 it gets more important. It actually moves up a systemic ladder. And then just tell Congress what you want them to do. Just tell them what you want done, what you want to see food policy look like, farm policy, the farm bill. And then it doesn't hurt if you want to summarize the letter in a certain way. And I've used this sentence here as a helpful summary. Please reform the 2023 Farm Bill in these essential ways to reduce hunger, improve nutrition, address racial inequity, restore farmland, and strengthen public health. That's a mouthful, but I can make these slides available, and of course, Edie will have this recorded, but I can make slides available, or even shorter things like just these items here. I can send you a sample outline if you want. You could put your email address in the chat, and I will email you sample outline. You could say, I want sample, or just say sample outline and your address, or sample letter and your address. We do have sample letters on our website, but they're actually longer, and they're written by Washington policy people. I like mine better. That's it. So as you see, these are all the points we've talked about. There's nothing on here that we haven't already talked about. And you don't have to necessarily say all 8 things, but maybe 1 or 2 of these really resonate with you and you want to lift them up. So like I say, I can make that available, and I'm going to go back for a moment to the sample letter. And it's a list. It's longer as a letter than we would like, but it's a big bill. So of course, if people do want a sample letter, they can look at this and see if that inspires them to write some specific things. They could copy it if they want, but of course, using your own words is always better. So when I say it's a sample letter, it's really just a sample. And again, happy to email these out to people. I've got them in PDF form so that they won't print funny. They'll come out all right. You won't have a margins problem with the printing. Maybe go back to that. So let me pause here, and I'm gonna let me pause the share. Great. A couple of people are talking in the chat. That's great. What questions does anyone have? Now I'm seeing the chat. So yes, I can send the slides. Absolutely. Samples. Okay, great.
I have the world's worst handwriting. Always have.
Yep.
Is there a way to say all of this in a way that my representative or my senator will be able to read it? Absolutely.
Yes. My father had that problem. His handwriting was really rough. So he would write these, he would type these on his computer, but because he was typing, he just went the extra mile of personalizing it. So he would absolutely say, hello, my name is, and tell him, and then he made sure he'd say a sentence that was so personal. I'm writing to you because it really bothers me that such and such, or I'm seeing this and I'm troubled, or he'd say something that reflected his own heart. So Catherine, that's what I would do. I think if you personalize it, it's as good as writing a letter. The handwritten letters are great because there's no disguising it. It's just an actual handwritten letter. But not all of us can do that. So go ahead and type it up and personalize it as best you can.
Thank you.
I think you're great. Any other questions or thoughts?
Yeah, I also had a question regarding the handwritten versus typed letter.
Okay.
There's a lot. It's very long letter if you want to write all these all these different points that you mentioned.
Yes,
So
it
I
is.
think a lot of people would be very hesitant to write a letter that is that long by hand.
I don't disagree with you. I think that is a long letter to write by hand. So you could do this and write it at home first. And so that's when I was talking about creative ways. Thank you for suggesting that. I mean, another thing to do is at your church, you could say this year the campaign is taking on the biggest bill we've seen in 15 years. So we're going to send you some outlines ahead of time. And how about if some of you write this at home and if you have to type it or write it home and bring it, and then other people will deal with it and write them right there. But I think there are a lot of ways to get around that so that people can. The most important thing is for people to bring those letters and to pray over those letters and to get those letters either in the mail or hand delivered. So that's what I would say. I think you're right, and I'm actually that church in Sacramento. They really wanted it to be the letters shortened, but that's why we went to an outline, because I felt like we were skipping important information and I didn't want to do disservice to one of those areas of concern. Any other questions or thoughts?
David, this is
Yeah.
Edie. Have any churches tried doing small group Zoom meetings with sample letters up on screen and meeting via Zoom?
Oh,
And then
that's awesome.
collecting the letters on Sunday, or I don't know, different way. I was just wondering if anybody's experimented with using Zoom for actual letter writing. We talked about it in
Mhm.
our church and we just didn't get going on it. So
That's brilliant, Edie. That you're the innovator yet again, to be honest. That's fantastic. I haven't heard any church talking about that, but it's great. Of course, I
think
mean,
sure.
I did last Sunday. I was doing a presentation to a church in Fort Collins, Colorado. Again, the West is new to me. It is the Wild West for me, and we did have that. So people, I sent things. I sent them PDFs and Word documents, but I also had those on the screen so people could see it that way. But you absolutely could do that, where someone would have it on screen on a Zoom, and people could use that to kind of write what they wanted. Sure. Absolutely.
Hi,
I-
David.
that
It's Sharon.
The little girl writing a letter in the one screen you showed was from our 2003 or
Ah.
2004 offering of letters video where our church was featured. She's now a teacher in Reading.
That's great. That's great. Hey, Pastor Sharon.
Hey, David, how are you doing?
Not bad.
I got on late, so I missed.
No
Can
worries.
you tell me so I can tell people where the bill is right now? Is it out of committee? Is
Oh,
it?
no. It's
in
early.
committee?
It's thankfully blessedly early. In fact, it's moving too fast for my taste, to be honest, already. Because we want to get in there and shape it, but it's still early. So the Farm Bill, the Senate is taking the lead on the Farm Bill. So it's not that we disregard the House members, but the Senate is taking the lead. And so since neither California senator is on the Agriculture Committee, we still want to go through the Senate. So we want to talk to Senators Feinstein and Padilla. Because of Senator Feinstein's situation, if people only have time for one letter or one expression, or they're only, what do they want to do? I would focus on Senator Padilla. And we have been in a lot of dialogue with his staff. So we absolutely want to get more information to him and our priorities before him, and tell him and his ag people to talk to the committee. So he's definitely not powerless. I think Senator Padilla is going to be someone recognized in the Senate for a long time.
Great, thank you.
Thank you.
I have an additional question since we're talking about writing to people.
Sure.
My representative is Garamendi, and
Ah.
our church's representative is Garamendi.
Okay.
Um,
And so is
Is-
Paul's. Go on.
is, is there a point in writing him
Oh, yeah.
and in addition to the senators?
Yeah, no, absolutely. No, and I better thank you for saying that, Kathy, because I need to qualify. I shouldn't, say unkind things like that or implicitly unkind. What I mean is that Congressman Garamendi has been very unsupportive and a one-man obstacle to food aid reform, just that one component of the farm bill. He hasn't spoken out against SNAP. He's not speaking out against these other parts. He just, for whatever reason, really is bought into shipping food overseas, shipping US food overseas, regardless of how long it takes and how much money it wastes and how few people it helps comparatively. So we've had many meetings with him, and I'm almost unwilling to have another one with him on this. So I would just leave it out, honestly. Special letter for John Garamendi's people. Don't bring up food aid reform.
Okay.
That's just my take. You write your conscience. I mean, say what you should say what you want to say, but what I don't want is them to tune out the rest of the letter and the rest of the message because of that. That's all. That's my concern.
Okay.
Any other, I see some good conversation going on in the chat, but it seems like it's people are answering questions for one another, which is fantastic. Any other questions or comments or thoughts?
So what will, in terms of the bill, what will be going on in April when we write the letters?
Right. In April, it should still be, in April, I think it's still going to be in the Agriculture Committee. So it should, the bill, the Ag Committee has to kind of build the bill in a sense. They have to shape the bill and decide what they're doing. They're having hearings now. They've begun hearings, but I think they're going to be having hearings for a few months. So it may be that they'll still be having hearings in April. That would be my expectation. So I would expect that at some point the committee will pass some version out for the rest of the to the floor for the rest of the Senate to consider. But what I'm hearing is that's not likely before summer. Things can change, but what we're hearing is that at this point, not likely before summer. So I think our letters are going so that we can get our senators to speak out and influence that bill while it's still being shaped in the Ag Committee. Paul, you got your hand up.
Yeah, I was delighted to hear that Catherine is in
Yes.
Garamendi's district. So we have a meeting planned with him on the 22nd of this month.
Zoom.
And if anybody else, on Zoom. And if anybody else is in that district, I'm putting my email up on the chat.
Fantastic.
And if you could take that, it's at 1:15 in the afternoon on the 22nd.
Is it a Wednesday?
Yeah, it's a Wednesday.
Wednesday. Oh, good. Oh, good. So I look in my mother's calendar. She's seeing Bonnie Raitt that night. Great.
Oh, heart like a wheel.
Absolutely. She's family, actually. Well, anyway, that's another story. So what challenges do people anticipate? I know we need to wrap up soon, but what challenges do people anticipate at your churches? What hurdles can we help you overcome? Because I think there's a lot of wisdom in this room of people on the call who have done these things successfully. Are there things that people are worried like, oh, I'm going to run into this, or someone's going to not let this happen because of that?
David, one of the challenges I see is COVID is still rearing its ugly head to some degree. And
Sure.
our church has both an online service and an in-person, and we have almost twice as many people at our online service as
Wow.
in person. So, and having it at coffee hour, sitting close together is something people are a little afraid of. That's why I thought about possibly the Zoom thing. I see that as a challenge this year.
Yeah, that's real. I think your solutions are great. I mean, to do this on Zoom, I wonder if it depends when you're doing it, but I wonder if people could get this in advance, get the information in advance, and then have a Zoom to go over things, and then write those letters and then bring them to church the following Sunday. And then, of course, there'll be those who don't do that, but you can still invite their letter writing, but it won't be as crowded an affair because so many people have already written their letters or typed their letters and brought them with them. I love it. I think that's a good way to go.
So David, is it better that all letters get sent together from the church than individually?
Great question. There are a lot of ways to do it. What I recommend is not focusing on envelopes and stamps, but just gathering the letters. Like, you know, here's one letter and here's another letter, and I would gather the letters together and maybe, you know, paper clip them together. And then, as I said at the beginning of the call, it helps if we can find someone to call that church off, that congressional local office in Vallejo or Truckee or Berkeley or whatever, or Novato, wherever it is, and say, look, we're going to have some letters, and we know that mailing them to Washington, D.C. takes a really long time these days, so we'd like to bring them to you. What's your process? And then they say, oh, okay, well, they might want you to. If they say, we really don't want that, then we need to respect that. But if you say, I'd really like to drop by, you know, our offering of letters is going to be on Sunday. I'd like to drop by, you know, would Monday morning work, Monday afternoon, you know, and set up a time and just drop by with a loose sheet of letters. Now, there again, if you know that you're going to do an offering of letters and someone else's church nearby is going to do one a week later, you could wait a week. Whoever's doing their letters the first week could hold on to them or deliver them to the other church who's doing them in week 2, and then they'll have twice as many letters to deliver. And I think there's just a more of an impact that way if we can have a coordinated offering of letters and deliver larger bulk letters together. And Senator Padilla has offices all over the place, even Sacramento.
One little heads up, some of these offices, and I think Padilla's was one of them, they have a lot of people working from home now. They don't have many people staffing the office, but maybe, and I tried to get a day of the week to bring things by, and it was still like, and this could be, things change with time, we all know that.
Sure.
And it could be people will be back in the office more, but that's certainly a reason you want to try and call ahead, but don't be like really bummed out if you end up mailing it to the local office.
Right. That is an excellent point. Thank you, Mary Claire. That's absolutely right. We're not the only ones living on Zoom with our church services. They're also living through Zoom, and you see more staff members who are clearly in their own homes on our Zoom calls. So it's true. And in that case, we would just want to mail it to the local office. We just had a conversation about this with my bread colleagues this morning, and there are a couple of people who are still pushing for letters to DC. Don't do it. I just tell you, don't do it. We had a fun disagreement about that. But it just, yeah, I was respectful, Paul. It's okay. But it's just, it's too slow, and we've been discouraged about doing that too many times from people in Washington. So I think we're much better going to the local offices. It just helps us set things up first. Any other questions or comments or thoughts?
I was going to say, David, in April of 2021, I think it was, we were not meeting in church. So we did do a Zoom offering of letters.
Oh, cool.
So we kind of chose a night and publicized it and sent out the link and had the information in the newsletter. But I was also able to put the letters in the chat so that people could open them and edit them, print them out. We didn't meet in church, I don't think, so we dedicated them right that night. And then just for a little incentive at that point, we gave out like 5 $10 bakery certificates. If you attended the Zoom, your name went in for these certificates. So
that's good.
That was kind of a fun idea. A fun thing that happened, but that was in 2021 we did it, but it worked out well.
I love it. That's great. So maybe your missions committee or your something committee, you know, has a little bit of a budget to do something like that, or maybe someone just says, oh, I'll contribute these, and someone, you know, contributes those certificates. That's a great idea. Make it fun, and we can have a little lottery and get more people to come to that Zoom and do that. Great.
Well, I'm all for bakery certificate, but you know, some people are sending postcards and
Yeah,
I guess they don't go through Kansas City and, you know,
Sure.
your sentence you said was wordy, your summary sentence, but I think it packs a lot in there.
Yeah.
And just trying to squeeze that onto a postcard or maybe a little bigger postcard,
yeah.
you know, with one little personal, you know,
Mm.
soundbite would really, you know, get through for people in a hurry.
That's an excellent point, Mark. I remember in past years, we've actually had a couple of churches hold offering of letters where we organized and only had postcards. And the funny thing was about it was for some letter writers who tend to overwrite, it's a postcard. Your limit is right in front of you. You know, you're like, oh, I guess I'm gonna wrap it up right here because you're running out of room. So there was a real upside to that. I remember buying lots of giant postcards and having them available for churches. That's a great plan too. And then in that case, mail it wherever you want. You know, mail it to Washington D.C. because it's going to go straight through, or mail it to the local office, or deliver it however you want to do it. But I would think about those things before you get into budgets for stamps. I just don't know that I just at this point, you know, deliver or mail your letters together
Mhm.
rather than buying an individual stamp for everyone and mailing letters. Yeah. And then and I think also filling out an envelope is just one more task. Let's skip a task if we can.
I just had one more thing, David. I was gonna say, don't forget about kids and youth, because
yeah.
we're planning a combined information session for our Sunday school kids and our Sunday school adults. And in the past, we've gotten them to write letters and we include them right in with
Right on.
everybody else's. So we're planning to do that again this year.
That's fantastic, Linda. That is so good. Yes, absolutely. And there are a lot of mediums. I've said it before, but I'll say it again. You know, as much as we like those handwritten letters and this offering of letters format, you know, I've gone to college campuses and filmed students, you know, film the students on their phone, and then they say what they want to Senator Feinstein, and then they upload the link, and I'm like, okay, you can do this way better than I can. And they upload those things, and boom, fast advocacy, it's right there. So I say lean into everyone's best format. Let's see, there's a question, when is Lutheran Lobby Day? Oh, we know that it's May 17. Regina would kill me if I got that date wrong. Yes, that is Wednesday, May 17 in Sacramento. So please mark that in your calendars. We want to be, oh, good, Savannah's on. Okay, yes, May 17. That's a great day. We want to be in Sacramento. And by the way, Bread for the World the last few years has encouraged letter writing and advocacy on state level bills as well. We're going to have our own meeting pretty soon to figure out which bills we're coalescing around. But I encourage all Bread members to actually support, regardless of denomination, to cooperate and support and participate in the Lutheran Lobby Day. It's just the best thing going. Well, I don't necessarily have any more, and I'm not going anywhere. But I also don't want to hold you prisoner. And Edie has Edie and Denny have lives where they probably have skiers to pull out of the snow or something.
Cars. Well, I want to let all of you know that if you sent me your email for a link, I've collected all those emails.
Oh, thank you.
I can send out anything that David wants to send out. If
Great.
you got the link from somebody else and didn't register with me your email, you need to send it to me and then you'll be on that list so that I can forward anything David has. So I'm thelots@gmail.com. And I will send out, David, if you want me to forward anything or send you the email list.
Yeah, if you don't mind, send me the email list so I know. Yeah, but that's wonderful. That's just so people ultimately get those sample letters and sample outlines and talking points. And it's a lot, I know. I apologize for that. The Farm Bill's a big hairy monster, but I think we can make a big change this year. Hoping and praying.
I'd like to ask Jenny, the guy sitting next to me, to close us with a very brief prayer, but if anybody wants to hang on and talk to David, we can leave the Zoom on for a few minutes after that.
Oh, there you go. That's good.
I think
That's
we
good.
ought to wind this up with speaking to the guy, to the person upstairs, not the guy, the person. Okay.
Dear God, dear gracious God, teach us how to be gracious. Teach us to continue working until all are fed. Teach us to find ways of doing that. We trust you, Lord. We thank you. Amen.
Amen.